I think we'll make a start now. We've got quite a few people. We've got now 16 people on the call. There should be more, and I have no doubt some other people will join in. But let's make a start. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Malcolm Corbett. I run INCA. I think if you could put yourself on mute whilst you're not speaking and unmute yourself when you speak, that would be very helpful. And I can hear myself echoing from somebody. I don't quite know who that is. It must be one of the phone. Probably, at least I think it's you actually.
Give me another chance.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just put myself on mute. Does it not work?
That's good. Yeah, when you're on mute, then we can't hear us. We can't hear the echo. Thanks, Annalise.
Okay.
Thanks, Annalise. Right, let's start. So I hope I don't get interrupted by my watch again. It's Siri. The first thing I must do is make an apology on behalf of Hamza Elahi from DTMS. I can hear myself echoing. Annalise, can you put yourself on mute? Right, that's good. Excellent. No, it's still not working. I'm gonna mute Annalise myself, I think.
No, it's still there, I think.
Okay, let's see if that works now. Yeah, I've muted Annalise. Sorry, Annalise. If you want to speak, Annalise, put something into the little text box that you can see at the bottom of the screen, and I'll know you want to speak. So the first thing to do is make an apology on behalf of Hamza Elahi, who is the DCMS person, the government person responsible for Brexit issues with our sector. He's been pulled from the meeting by higher authorities. This is almost inevitable because a general election is being called, and at that point in time, officials go into a process which is known as purdah. Effectively, they can't speak about policy issues which may be the subject of the election campaigns and will inevitably change if there's a change of government or not, as the case may be. This is pretty unfortunate. I have done my best to persuade him to stay, and if for no other reason than just to answer questions, because if, like me, it's as clear as mud as what's going on at the moment, you know, for me it is. If it's the same for you, then having somebody from government would be helpful. But we have the second best option here, which is Emma and Till from Political Intelligence. They're the people who provide us with support on government affairs work, and they are also the Secretariat of ISPA. So, or Political Intelligence is. So they're very well connected into the sector and have a very good idea about all the stuff that's going on. Just a final point on the sort of process issues. I'm not sure that everybody was able to do so, but we ran a seminar in Manchester on the 16th of October in advance of our conference, INCA's conference, on the issues of Brexit. This we followed up with a very short survey which you should have received information about, and those that have completed it, thank you very much. It's very, very helpful. The questions were drawn from issues that came out of the seminar in Manchester, and this webinar really has been set up because originally we were going to be leaving the EU on the 31st of October. That is not now going to happen, but we felt that we really ought to be running a webinar before we left, just to catch up on where things stand. I've sent through a 4-point agenda, just to be quick really, which is get the latest position, what's actually going on at the moment, feedback from the short survey, what are the key issues that people think are important, are there any surprises in there? I don't think there's many. Feedback and Q&A with people on the call, and any recommendations for future action by INCA and its members. Personally, I was a little bit sceptical about this process when we were being pushed by government to apply for a grant to run a 1-month Brexit process like this. But you know, I thought, well, why look a gift horse in the mouth? And in fact, actually, I think actually it's quite useful. I think there have been a number of issues that have arisen I wasn't aware of before. And having a discussion between a group of people about some of the issues, I think is actually quite a helpful thing to be doing. And then providing feedback to government is, again, helpful in its own way to try to ensure, as far as possible, that the interests of people in our sector are at least heard and hopefully recognised in future going processes. So with that, Emma, would you like to update us on what the hell is going on at the moment, please?
Well, that's quite a task, I think, at the moment. So yes, hello everyone. I'm Emma from Political Intelligence, and I think my colleague Till is also on the line. So we'll be able to jump in with any further comments. So yes, as Malcolm said, we've been drafted in rather late notice for this, so do bear with us slightly. In terms of the kind of lay of the land, state of play, as we are at the moment, as you'll have seen last night, MPs have voted for an election on the 12th of December. So we are heading towards purdah and dissolution of Parliament next week, at which point kind of campaigns will start in earnest, and obviously everyone's Brexit stance will likely get kind of played out throughout that election. In terms of where we are with the EU, on Monday, it's been a long week, on Monday the EU ratified the extension which was asked for through the Ben Act, and that lasts until the 31st of January, or if a deal is passed through Parliament and the EU Parliament before then we will leave before that date. So it's kind of a flex extension, if you will. To leave, the government will have to bring their deal to a meaningful vote. The Johnson government was trying to do that with the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, or the WAB. They have now said that they won't bring that forward, and there won't be enough time to bring that forward until before Parliament is dissolved. So that will all have to be brought forward by the next government, and we can get into what those next governments might be and what they might do in that case in a second. So the Ben Act that required the UK Prime Minister to ask for an extension does run out on the 31st, but does make provision so that if MPs wanted to reinstate it, so that they set a deadline again when we're coming up to, say, the 31st of January, to request another extension, they will be able to do that slightly easier than they did before, but it's by no means guaranteed. It doesn't kind of roll on for the next deadline. So there is still the chance of no deal, not tomorrow, luckily, though that would also depend on the EU Commission and the EU Parliament not granting an extension again, which is kind of pretty unlikely, given the kind of devastating effect it would have on Ireland and a lot of EU member states. One thing to consider there is that the next EU budget starts at the end of 2020 for the next 7 years, so that might start to kind of press things. Obviously they want to get it done as well, but not having certainty of who's going to be included in those budgets is obviously going to be quite an important issue for them. Till, was there anything I've missed? Like I've really whipped through.
So that I think that was a good overview. Obviously, if some of the people on the call were a bit bamboozled by things like PAN Act and other acts, do let us know. We sort of talk about this on a daily basis and sometimes forget that other people have actually more important things to do than worry about Brexit. So if you do have any questions about this, do let us know, well, now or later on this call, or if you have any questions after this call, ping Malcolm a message and he can pass it on to you, to us. So we're happy to help. I think, as Emma said, it's the whole thing about Brexit. It's the annoying bit is that we have these cliff edges, which are then delayed again and again and again, which make it really difficult for businesses, especially smaller businesses, to plan. What we have seen other companies do, not just in the telecom sector, but also in other sectors, is to sort of use this as an opportunity to sort of look at business planning or process issues that they would like to change anyway, and then see whether they can sort of solve the problems. So if you look at sort of your hiring strategy or something like that. So that's what lots of other companies do, and that makes it easier to, in a way, justify putting some time and money into Brexit planning. But I fully get that it's really, really difficult for even like a small or medium-sized business to sort of engage with this on a meaningful basis. But that's just a sort of general outline of what we have seen other companies do. And I would suggest we go back to the sort of more political issues at MRA. If you guys have any questions about that, do let us know. Or if Malcolm has any questions.
Okay, just to summarise then, so the original withdrawal agreement that Johnson was putting forward through Parliament is now basically off the table. Will it be in the Conservative Party manifesto as far as you're aware, Emma?
So we assume so, that they've got this deal that they are then going to kind of put to the public, saying this is the deal, the only deal that's on the table, and so one would assume that forms their manifesto. They don't really have anything that they won't be pushing forward on.
So
they sort of have said in Parliament that they would seek to reintroduce the current a deal along the lines of the current agreement. Otherwise, they would need to go back to Brussels. And I think the hope of the Conservative Party is to get a majority in the next Parliament, and then to move very swiftly with passing the withdrawal agreement bill. If they wanted to change it, they would need to go back to Brussels to renegotiate. That takes time. That has to gives other people the chance to sort of break agreements, break coalitions. It's just difficult. So I think the Tories do want to go with the current deal, but they do need a majority for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Till. So, so if the Conservatives win the next election, then in all likelihood the existing withdrawal agreements, which has been negotiated with the EU, will come back into play, and with a majority, then the Conservatives will be likely to be able to pass that. If Labour win a majority in the general election, then presumably they will go to the EU and try and negotiate some sort of other deal. And then try and get that through Parliament. Almost certainly that would imply some sort of extension. And then they're committed, I believe, to taking that back to a second referendum. Is that correct, Emma? Is that the right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they are looking to renegotiate with Brussels and try and gain basically better access to the single market and the customs union. And then take that to a confirmatory vote, I think that's what they're calling it, rather than second referendum, where I think to for Remain to be on the ballot paper, and then that will, then the Brexit position that they would then.
And if we have another hung Parliament, then purgatory continues. Basically, that's sort of that's the most likely outcome, and it's not clear what's going to happen. Okay, so that's the political position. Are there any questions from people on the call for either Till or Emma on the political position? If you could indicate in some way. So David, first, you've indicated you'd like to.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Thanks, Till. So, kind of bring it back to the nuts and bolts interest of any alternate, working our business plans out and discussing with our investors. Right now, we should actually now be considering 3 contingent approaches, i.e., a withdrawal agreement bill passing, i.e., a deal Brexit. Still the potential of a no-deal Brexit, which obviously would be the angle if Conservative Party was won the election, got through, had majority, or didn't have sufficient weight on the vote, and the capability of us actually remaining in the EU. Whereas up until this week, in essence, we could all probably take the third of those off the agenda. But I'm feeling now that it's really back on. Obviously depending upon the outcome of the election.
Emma, what's your view?
Yes, so it, as you say, it entirely depends on the outcome of the election. So you do have parties on a Remain footing, like the Liberal Democrats, and they have ruled out, I think today, that they wouldn't go into a coalition with either of the parties. And obviously they're the kind of strongest proponents for Remain. With the Labour stance, it's difficult to know, largely because their whole stance has been kind of built around slight ambiguity, to know how far they would actually push a referendum with Remain as an option, and whether that would even win is also like to be seen, really. So yes, it's not entirely off the table, but I would probably say it's quite low.
Quite low. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that. In a way, I wouldn't, for the time being at least, wouldn't put it back into the sort of wouldn't put it back onto the sort of list of feasible options. And the election is quite soon, so on the 12th of December, I think we know better whether it's likely to be an option again. At the moment, I would sort of agree with Emma that it's theoretically possible, but very unlikely. But we know by the 12th December whether it really depends on the shape of the next Parliament.
Thank you very much, Till. Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions on the current rather uncertain situation? It's just uncertainty prevails all around at the moment. So are there any other questions on that from anybody on the call? No? If you're on mute, you have to take yourself off mute to let me know. Good. All right. Okay, we'll move on then. So the other part of this process that's following the seminar on the 16th is to do a quick survey, and about 30 people have completed the survey, which, given we only set it up in the middle of last week, is pretty good. I'm really pleased that we've got people actually filling it in. It's short. There's only a few questions on it. It takes about 5 minutes to complete, deliberately designed to be fast. And the quick reading of the results coming in this morning are not that surprising. So major concerns are around potential changes to the immigration rules, which would affect network build, could affect network build. So this, as I think everyone knows, is proposals to change, move away from freedom of movement, which means that any EU citizen can live and work in any other EU country, to a more restrictive regime, some sort of points-based regime, potentially with sort of lower limits on what people can get paid before they're allowed to come in and things like that. Given that quite a few of the civil engineering firms that build networks employ labour from a variety of European countries, and that labour is actually in demand from a lot of other European countries, there are concerns about whether or not labour would be a limiting factor on the ability to deploy new, particularly full fibre networks, where about a lot of the work is in civil engineering. It's 85% of the respondents. Okay, caveat, small survey, all right, several caveats in fact. It's a small self-selecting sample in this survey, and it's a short survey to keep within the 5-minute completion window. But nevertheless, all right, just giving a little snapshot of views. 85% of the people responding think that there is the potential for at least some, if not serious, labour shortages under proposals that are being discussed. Obviously, we don't have clear proposals at the moment, but there are serious concerns about that. That is the #1 topic. This is not a surprise to anybody, I think, on the call, but it is something we need to be pushing very, very hard during this period where we have a general election coming, and maybe we can get this sort of thing into manifestos. You never know. Other takeaways from an early reading of the results are that 25% of respondents said they are making plans to accommodate changes in trade rules. A lot of people aren't, because if you're an operator or you're in some other parts of the sector other than suppliers and vendors, then it's not as such an immediate issue to you. However, at least some people on the call are involved in that, and I'll ask Claire in a few minutes maybe to comment on that from the perspective of Comtech. Another takeaway is that while nearly 50% don't anticipate any changes to investor sentiment, a small but quite important number do anticipate some changes or are concerned about some changes, and I think we need to have a look at that a little bit more. Now, I think everybody on the call is aware that this is a sector that has shown a great degree of buoyancy in terms of investment appetite over the past few years, since government policy changed very substantially in 2016 towards encouraging competitive deployment of new full fibre and new 5G wireless networks, wireless services. There has been a substantial flow of investment, and in fact we calculated as INCA that about £3.3 billion was committed to the independent sector, i.e. not BT and not Virgin Media, last year alone, which is a substantial amount of money. So any changes in investor sentiment are going to be obviously of concern. However, about 50% of the people responding to the survey didn't anticipate any particular changes in sentiment, which I think is great. That confirms some things which were said at the seminar by Charles Cameron in particular. And I think many people on the call will know Charles. He is one of the principals behind Cameron Barney. Cameron Barney are a firm which has helped many of the altnets raise money in their early stages, and they are also partnered with InfraCap, one of the major infrastructure investment funds. Charles's view is that for infrastructure investors who are looking at long-term investments in very long-term assets, for them Brexit and the Brexit issues are something of a bump on the road, but it's not something that's going to affect them over the longer term. And in any case, they'll price in any risk into the investment deals that they do. So I think that's been reflected in what people have said in the survey, although a small number are concerned. And at least one or two global funds have said that at this point in time, they're not going to be investing, or they're going to wait and see what happens with the UK before they maintain their commitments. So there's the investment issue. Another area that we asked about was the amount of senior management time that has to be devoted to some of these issues. That was raised again in the seminar, I think by David particularly, and Claire also mentioned this from the point of view of having to employ more people to deal with some of the issues. So about something like 20% of the respondents said that they have devoted significant senior management time to Brexit, but then 64% haven't. Basically, they haven't had to, or haven't felt it necessary to do so, or have had other issues which are much higher on their agenda than trying to worry about this sort of thing. So those are some of the takeaways. There are not very many surprises, but however, I do think it's a useful exercise, and I think it's worthwhile continuing some of this work, because the issue of Brexit is going to be with us for at least some time to come, if not years and years and years. Oh my God, it might be gone forever. You never know. That would be awful. But anyway, I'm planning to do a little bit of further digging into the survey. It would be interesting to look at why some people, what are some of the issues that people are facing. If there are any comments, though, that would be helpful. And I think actually for Claire, you raised the issue at the seminar about the amount of effort you have to put in as a supplier into having to manage some of the import-export issues. Maybe you could sort of just brief people about that a little bit.
Yeah, certainly.
Introduce yourself and your company, Claire.
Yes, certainly. So I work for Comtech, and we are a distribution company supplying network operators and other companies within the telecoms industry. So contractors, people who maybe subcontracting work, installing fibre networks, and also copper networks, LAN networks within the UK. To give you a kind of idea of the scale, of our business, I suppose. I suppose we stock between 12 to 15,000 products, and we have over 30,000 products on our system database. So to sort of give you an idea of the scale, our turnover this year will be probably 75 million, something like that. So we're quite a reasonable size, but we do also import and export a lot of goods. So potential differences in duty payments, depending on whether there's a deal or no deal on Brexit has quite a large impact on our company. We are obviously trying to take steps to minimise this, but a lot of it we're really concerned about is the paperwork involved. Actually, maybe additional documentation requirements to get through ports, congestion at ports, as and when Brexit actually goes through. And sort of the terms of actually sort of the logistics of managing Brexit through our business. So as Malcolm mentioned, We've employed additional staff in our logistics team and our imports team to manage additional paperwork. We've split our deliveries from just using the Felixstowe port for sea containers to come in. We've now split that between 3 to 4 ports across the UK. We have, so I'm trying to think, we've invested about another £1.5 million worth of stock to hold in the UK to try and even out any bumps in requirements. And we've really already started a process where we're trying to work with our manufacturers, the suppliers across the global one, especially Far East, where we try and get ahead of the paperwork trail as much as we can, trying to make sure we have the information we need now, or may need now, rather than trying to catch up on it all post-Brexit.
Thank you very much.
Is that right?
Yes, so it's a big job from your point of view.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a large admin job, essentially. Really, it's just getting paperwork in order and processes from our point of view.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. David, you raised one of the issues about the impact on management time, as well as the issues around labour supply and so on, when we had the seminar. Are there any comments you think are worth making on the call? I think you're on mute, David.
Apologies, I'll come off mute. That normally helps. Yeah, so only really to reiterate a bit of what Claire said, is actually it's about process and management thinking, about contingency planning, all of which puts the stress on. I think, I'll put a bit more flesh in ITS's response to the survey as to what we meant by the 20% of management time, strategic management time. And it's basically about 1 day a week on average around the senior management team, focused on the strategic issues and the contingency planning. So that involves just the time to ask and get sense out of the supply chains, particularly contractor to subcontractor, around resource and labour, and also conversations around with suppliers and their supply chains. And I think as we said between Claire and I at the seminar, a greater collaboration between the operators and serious level distributors and supply aggregators like Conder, I think are going to be really critical, in the event of any nature of actual Brexit, because the level of demand that we can aggregate and work on with distributors like Conder is going to be really key and really important. Just another quick thought I had when you were talking about the investor piece as well, Malcolm, is we've done a little bit of work with an ITS since the seminar on the investment conversations, in the light actually of some of the things that Charles Cameron was saying at the seminar. And we've actually now also built in a consideration that obviously the investors can naturally ring fence themselves, so they'll still be happy to invest in the market because they've got their mechanisms, such as, I think as you mentioned, is in the survey, just flexing cost of capital. However, it doesn't take much variation if you do the sensitivity analysis on the kind of business cases over the length of term that we look at in our sector, to actually move the internal rate of return hurdle on a business case. So i.e., if cost of capital moves slightly, there's a higher impact on the IRR to a business case to justify pulling down debt financing, for example, onto a network. So I think we mustn't lose sight, and it's something we might need to think of in terms of the investor angle, about what the impact is on how many networks suddenly may become unsustainable in terms of getting finance.
Okay, that's something that's an interesting point. I think that means we need to have more conversations, I think probably brokered by Charles Cameron, with some of the investment organisations, just to try and get a sense of what impact that might have generally on the sector. I mean, obviously it would be difficult to do that on an individual case basis.
Oh, yeah, but in general.
But to try to get something on a more general sense, and then again feed that back into government. All this is going to get fed back into government. Daniel, you've got a question. Daniel typed in the little text box. If you've got a question, stick it, send me a quick, or type something in there so we can see it. Daniel, what's your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Malcolm, I have one after that.
Just following on from David's point, I was speaking to someone at the start of the week. They've said they've been offered 10% interest to, for big investments, and it was already pretty brutal in terms of the returns. They'd have to get the number of homes past the number of connections. So if you stick an extra % on that, then you've got to run a lot faster. You've got to convert more of those homes passed into paying customers, and some people will just walk away from that. It's going to be too difficult to actually make those networks pay. So I take the point, you can price that in, but it's going to be paid for by INCA members having to put a lot more effort in just to make the thing work. The question I actually wanted to ask though was, we know that there's potentially going to be regulatory divergence between the UK and the EU on all sorts of things, from chlorinated chicken to fish quotas. What's the analysis, or where are we at the moment in terms of understanding how far we'll go diverge in terms of telecoms regulations? Because obviously it's a highly regulated business. BT, partly owned by Deutsche Telekom, so there's already those sort of European links in there. I know a lot of the European incumbents work together. So what's the sort of sense of how that's going to work?
Maybe either Emma or Till. Could you respond to that? Till?
Yeah, I can. I would say over time there might be a bit of divergence, but if you look in the sort of short term, a lot of the sort of regulatory capacity at the moment is in Brussels, where things like the European Electronic Communications Code have been agreed on in the last few years, and all the member states, including the UK, have just started to introduce that code in their sort of at national level, and that will take the next 1.5 years roughly, and that code will sort of create the rough regulatory boundaries for the telecom sector. And I wouldn't expect that the UK government changes that significantly, even in a no-deal scenario. If you have a deal, then we need to implement it in full anyway, because we are sticking to European legislation throughout the transition period, which ends at the moment by the end of 2020. But even if there was no deal, what we have heard from DCMS is that they might tweak things here and there, but they wouldn't cancel the whole thing. Part of the reason for that is that they just don't have the capacity to do something similar in the UK at the moment.
Till, can I respond to that, Till?
Yeah, sure.
Who's speaking, please? Okay,
and with apologies, it's Dave Happy, and I did say I need to drop off in about 5 minutes or less, so when you hear the click, I apologise. I would broadly agree with your summation, but I have, I guess, two advantages. One is that until recently, my daughter was actually working for the PPS to Boris Johnson, which is useful. Two, I'm a passionate Remainer myself, who as a VP in Samsung was responsible for this regulatory issue within Digital Europe and based in Brussels. Yep. There are some divergences coming. You're absolutely right in your summation, but I think they're going to come up sooner than we expect. I was also I had the misfortune to accidentally join a meeting between DCMS and Ofcom about 18 months ago, where it was blindingly obvious to me that they'd missed out any issues regarding potential valuation for Treasury for UK spectrum, any combination of fibre and spectrum working together in future 5G networks, and how that might diverge. But most importantly, I was one of the people that helped to facilitate the original Radio and Telecommunications Terminal Equipment Directive. And so therefore, Claire, to your points and the huge effort and the extra £1 million, I think you said, and 30,000 products, these are serious material issues. So I was speaking with one of the big 4 major global manufacturers 2 weeks ago, and they turned around to me and said, Dave, if you seriously think we're going to manufacture dedicated equipment for the United Kingdom market, you're dreaming. It's not going to happen. Now, what that in turn means is, so for example, we have a change at the moment where 3.8 to 4.2 gig is now available. the supply of handsets is a key component of that, or other end user and other terminal equipment. What's going to happen over time, if we significantly fall out of step, issues surrounding radio spectrum and devices in particular will diverge quite rapidly, and we will find ourselves with regulators and governments making policy where there's no equipment to serve it. That concerns me. The other concern would be, what if you do something and then subsequently your equipment, which is approved for use in the UK under the RED, is suddenly no longer fit for use, and you've got it sitting in a warehouse in Felixstowe. So my concluding comment would be, Malcolm, if you'd like me to take an action, and you can drop me an email at the end of this and just tell me, I'm more than happy to put together 2 or 3 pages if this would be of value to the group on what my concerns are. Whatever facilitates this dialogue and prevents people having to spend more than they need to in time and money on this, I will do my best to facilitate. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David. That's a very helpful contribution. And yes, if you do, please do drop me a line about this. This would be very useful. We didn't ask in the survey specifically about regulatory divergence because I wanted to keep the survey short, basically. But this is an issue which I think will concern people, and I think maybe we need to probe that a bit further. Annalise, you wanted to make a point. You emailed me to make a point about investment through EIB. Do you want to ask your question or make your point?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think just coming back to the investment side, I think it's worth.
Annalise, say who you are and where you're from.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Annalise Sabarian from Point Topic. I think it's worth having a look at the European Investment Bank and the UK's involvement in that. There have been investments made in both by the EIB in both GigaClear and Hyperoptic. I don't know if there's any other independent networks that have benefited from investment or loan possibly from the bank. So it's worth looking, I think, in the withdrawal agreement and the future, the relationship paper. I think there were some comment there as to what the UK would like. I think it would like to be involved going forward. I think there was an issue with assets and so on. But I think EBI investment is not only investment in itself or loans in itself, it also provides confidence for others to invest. So it does have a knock-on effect potentially if that sort of investment route wasn't available to the UK companies. So that's, yeah, I think ought to look at that side as well.
Thank you very much, Annalise. We did have somebody from the CEB fund at the conference in the investor workshop, Thierry Levenck, which was very, very helpful. They're not actually, they're linked to the EIB, but I can't quite remember how the relationship works. But certainly that was helpful. And I think, yes, I mean, this is going to be an issue that we need to be considering. Are there any other comments?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Annalise. Are there any other issues that people think are worth raising or that need to be fed back to DCMS from this? Could you indicate if you do have any other issues? Any other comments at all? Has this been helpful to you? For the people I can see on the screen, you know, if it's been helpful, stick your hand up. Yeah, so people are sticking their hands up. Good, and for the people I can't see on the screen, I hope it's been helpful to you as well. If you do have any other thoughts or comments, then please send them to me. You can email me directly or simply email info@inca.coop. It all comes through, gets through. And oh yeah, Heidi Beth says very useful, thank you very much, and Daniel says very useful too, so that's great, thank you. What we'll do is we'll summarize this and make sure that you're kept up to date with it. And future activities, we'll make sure that you know about that as well. As I say, this is an issue that's going to run for a while at least. And personally, I think it is worthwhile actually making sure that we engage with each other and try as best we can to influence future policy so that they don't just forget about us in the rush to do something you know, very big and changing everything all at the same time. Okay, if there's no other comments, I'll say thank you very much. And yeah, we'll feed that all back to DCMS. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Okay, bye-bye, bye-bye.